Hello ladies and gentlemen and welcome back to the channel. Today I will be teaching you how to play chess. Chess is a game that has been played for thousands of years and it has been played by millions if not billions of people at this point in time. So let us get you started on your journey on how to play chess. The first thing you'll need is an 8x8 board. You'll notice the board is 8x8 and it's a checkerboard design. It alternates between light and dark squares. That will be important in a moment. Now let's get on to the pieces. There are 6 unique type of pieces, so we're going to start off with the first type of piece, and that is pawns. I'm just going to put some pawns and spray them randomly across the board, and then I'm going to put on what we call the kings. Okay, so if we load this up, okay, pawns start on what is called the second rank. Now the chessboard is rows are called ranks, and its columns are called files. So the ranks go from 1 through 8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. White starts on the first and second rank, and black starts on the 7th and 8th rank. Now pawns go in front of the rest of the pieces. So the pawns will all sit on the second rank for white and the 7th rank for black. That is important because on a pawn's first move, if it has not yet moved, it may go 2 squares forward. Normally, pawns can only go 1 square forward, but on their first turn, they may choose to either go 1 square or 2 squares forward. So in this case, we will move this pawn here. Now, these 2 pawns cannot move. It's black's turn to make a move, so that's why the white pawn can't move, but that black pawn can't move forwards, and pawns are the only piece that can't go backwards. Pawns can't come backwards, and that'll be important later. So black needs to make another move. So they move this pawn forward. Now you ask, okay, but in chess you take off the pieces. So how does the pawn do that? Well, a pawn will make a capture when it takes another piece. It captures 1 square diagonally forward, like that. And then black will reciprocate like this. So it can go to the left or to the right, provided there's a piece on that square. And that is how pawns move. That is the basics. But there are some special things that they do that we'll look at in a moment. So quick recap. Pawns on their first move can go 1 or 2 squares forward. Otherwise, they just go 1 square forward and they capture sideways diagonally. Okay, so what else can pawns do? Well, they've got this very cool move that they do, and it's French. It's called en passant. You see, in this position, white could move the pawn 1 square forward, but then it will get captured. So instead, they go 2 squares forward. But for this move, and this move only, black can capture as if white only went 1 square forward. It's called en passant, which is French for in passing. So we do an instant playback. They could go 1 square and be captured, so they go 2 squares. And for this move only, black can capture like this. Okay, and the final thing, pawns can't go backwards. They're the only piece that can't go backwards. So when they reach the end of the board, like now, they can promote to any of these 4 pieces: the queen, a knight, a rook, or a bishop. Doesn't matter how many. You could have 4 knights or 6 queens already on the board. You can promote to any of these 4 pieces. The only piece you can't get when a pawn reaches the end of the board is a king. You can't get a second king. Alright, now that we know how pawns move, let us clear the board and let us move on to the next piece, which are bishops. Bishops are very special pieces, as are all chess pieces really, but not more special than you. Okay, so in the game, you are given 2 types of bishops. You're given your light squared bishop, which moves diagonally on all the light squares, but regardless of which bishop it is, both bishops move diagonally. Let's just clarify that. One moves on dark squares, one moves on light squares. Bishops, like most pieces, can't jump over a piece. So this bishop over here can't jump over this pawn to get to either of these 2 squares. And you can't put your bishop on a square which has got already one of your pieces. This bishop can't jump over this pawn to get to either of these two squares, but you are allowed to capture this pawn. So pawns are the only piece that capture differently to how they move. Okay, now that we know how bishops move, let's look at the next piece, which is probably the most tricky piece. So I'm going to put some pawns on the board just to show you, and then we'll get a knight, and we'll have the king and another king. Okay, now we've got knights here. Knights are some of the most tricky pieces to describe how they move because it almost looks random. So they move in these little L's. The best way to describe it is two squares and then one square. So if we go two squares to the right, and then it's one square up or one square down, and that leaves us with these two squares as options. But it could also start with two squares down and then a square to the left or a square to the right, which leaves us with these two squares as places where it can move. It could also start with two squares to the left and then move one square up, one square down, which will leave us with these two. And finally, of course, two squares up and then a square left or a square right. And that leaves us with these two as options. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. So in this position, we can't go here. We can't do that little L, but we can go here and take the pawn. Just like that. Okay, I hope that was helpful to you. Let's go on to the fourth type of piece, and that is rooks. Now rooks, like most pieces, cannot jump over other pieces. So in this position, I'm going to show you why that is important. So rooks are one of your more valuable pieces. They're worth 5, so they're worth more than a bishop and a knight and a pawn. And a piece's value comes from how many squares they control. So this rook here, this one that's flashing red, it can go up the entire G file, and it can go one square left and one square right. So rooks, if I make a move, can go horizontally and vertically as far as they like, provided there's nothing in the way. So this rook can go to any of these squares and any of these two squares. But if you move it up just here, then it can go along this whole row and this whole column. So it can go along the whole 7th rank and along the whole H file. Okay, so now that we know how rooks move, but this rook can't move, just a reminder, because it can't jump over this pawn and it can't jump over this knight. If this were your opponent's pieces, it could take them, but it's not, so can't do that. Okay, finally, we've got the queen, the most powerful piece that you have on the board. And it's the most powerful piece because it controls the most amount of squares. And how does it control these squares? Well, it can move diagonally like a bishop, so it can go along all these diagonals, but it can also move horizontally and vertically like a rook. So the queen is really your shining star. It controls the most amount of squares, and you really don't want to just give it up unless you're taking your opponent's queen and you guys are trading pieces. We'll talk about that in a future video. But so your queen is your most powerful piece because it controls the most amount of squares. It combines the abilities of a rook and of a bishop. Okay. Now finally we need to talk about the king. Now kings are your most important piece, but your laziest piece. Because kings can only move one square in any direction. So they can go anywhere they like, but only one square forward. I want you to imagine that this is the guy, a really big person. I don't want to say a big dude or a big lady, but a really big person that is extremely unfit. They only eat McDonald's, no shade to McDonald's. And they take a couple of steps and they're out of breath. So this king can go one square up. This king can also go one square up, and they can go one square up all the time. They can't get any closer than this because otherwise the other king will take the other king. Just large note, because I've taught little children for the last few months, you cannot take the king. It's a stupid rule, but it's the rule. You can't take the king. And we'll get to why that is in a moment. So this king can go this way, and this king can go this way, and then this king can come this way, and it can go this way. And what will happen is the king can come here, and kings can capture pieces as long as they're right next to each other. Okay, so now that we know how that works, let's us look at how to set up a chessboard. So how you set up a chessboard is like this. On the second and seventh rank is just a row of pawns. Pawns are like the fence of a position. So they look like this. They're the wall in front. If you're white or if you're black, there must be a dark square in your bottom left-hand corner. So this square and this square. And then there should be a light square in your bottom right-hand corner. So this square and this square. Okay. And then working your way from out to in, it should be rook, knight, bishop. So out to in, rook, knight, bishop. Out to in, rook, knight, bishop. Rook, knight, bishop. And then these two central squares. If you're on a board with letters, you put the king on the E file, the E1 square, or the E8 square, and the queen on the D1 or D8 square. If you don't have letters, the easiest way to remember this is that the queen must go on her color. Okay, so now how does a game develop? Well, it goes like this. You just make some moves. You bring your pieces out and you play some chess. You just, do things like this. You move your pawns one square or two squares. You move the bishops along diagonals. You let knights make moves. We'll talk about all of this more in depth in another video. But chess is not as complicated as people make it look sometimes. And I've gotten to this position because there's one special move that the king can do, and it's going to be part of another video that I do talking about basic um, skills that you need in chess. But it's called castling, and it's to help get the king to the side of the board where he's most likely to not be attacked, let's say, where he's most protected. So because he combines with his rook, he can for one move only go two squares. And there are some conditions to this. He can't be going to a square where he will be in check, and he can't castle if he himself is in check. We'll talk about what check is later. Also, him and his rook that he's using can't have moved yet. So you see, the king hasn't moved, and I haven't moved either of these two rooks. So how does castling work? Castling works like this, where you go two squares, and the rook comes to the other side where you end up. So, like this, in motion. Okay? That looks fine. So the king went two squares, and the rook came to the other side. So we do it the other way. So two squares, and the rook comes to the other side. Okay. So now that we know that, how do we end the game? Well, we end the game like this. So we're going to set up a position just to talk about check very quickly. So here, this is a check. So the bishop has come out and is attacking our king. If we do nothing, black will take our king. So that's not allowed. You see, I'm not allowed to do this. It makes that fart noise. If you can hear that, it makes the king glow red. So, we're in what they call check. Our king is under attack, so we need to watch. So there's a few ways to get out of check. The first way is to move the king out the way. Now the bishop no longer sees the king. The second way is to put another piece in the way, because remember, bishops can't jump over pieces. So we can do that with the pawn, with this knight, with this knight, with the bishop, or with the queen. But remember, a bishop is worth less than a queen, so we don't want to block with the queen. And the final thing we can do is take the piece that is attacking our king. Oh, like that. Okay, so we know what check is. Now we need to discuss checkmate. What is checkmate? Well, checkmate looks like this, where in such a position, the king is given a check, so he is in danger of being taken, and there's nothing you can do to prevent him being taken. So this king can't run to any of these these squares. It can't obviously go there because this is in the way of where the queen is going. And none of these beautiful pieces can get in the way. So regardless of what white does, black will take the king. So I'm pretty sure that's all you need to know. There will be more videos in this series. I hope you enjoyed this one. Leave a like if you did. Comment on how I can improve these videos and what you need explanation on. And subscribe if you'd like to see more from me. Until next time.